Hey everybody, welcome or welcome back. It's Audrey from Audrey Approved. Today I'm going to do a tag video. It's called the In and Out tag video, which is basically a set of 25 questions, and it's smash or pass. Are you in or are you out when it comes to these kind of book themes or book tropes? I was tagged to do this from Emma from A Cup of Books, but the original tag comes from Rick, who has recently rebranded to, I think, Why You Should Read. So I'll link both their channels down below. Emma has great nonfiction recommendations. If you like kind of the diversity of nonfiction that I read, you'll definitely like her stuff. And Rick, as always, has really great fiction recommendations. Question 1 is reading the last page first, which is maybe the most offensive of all of the questions in this entire set. Who does that? I don't know who does that. I think that is, I'm gonna say, a horrible way to approach reading. Imagine reading the last sentence or the last page of All Quiet on the Western Front, which has, I think, one of the most powerful kind of ending scenes of any book that I've read in kind of recent years. I can't imagine reading that first before going back and starting the book. So it just totally changed the reading experience. So I'm totally out when it comes to this. Second is enemies to lovers. I do really like enemies to lovers. I think it is one of my favorite kind of romance tropes, although I agree with many people that very frequently it's not enemies, it's kind of like dislike to lovers. But I read a book this year that embodies enemies to lovers in a way that I've kind of never seen in the romance genre before. The book was, I have to write it down because I always forget the title, The Crown of Oaths and Curses by J.Bree. And I have never seen two love interests hate each other the way that these two characters hate each other. So this is the first book in, like, I don't know, a trilogy or a series. And the first book is like 600 pages of buildup where they truly hate each other. And I think just having finished those first 600 pages, they're maybe starting to like each other. So I am eagerly anticipating the second release for this one because, again, I am a fan of enemies to lovers. When it comes to dream sequences, I am out. I feel like dream sequences is lazy because very typically I feel like it allows authors to convey information and plot points in a dream, and it doesn't have to make sense because it's a dream. And I just feel like when authors do that, I get really annoyed because I feel like they should have integrated that information in the true plot. Anyway, the only book that I think has ever managed to embody dream sequences that I do really like and enjoy is Pedro Paramo, which is a classic of Mexican literature. And I read this as part of a class, which is probably the only reason why I liked it so much, is because we had to discuss it for so long. But typically when I see dream sequences, it's like when I see songs. My eyes just glaze over and I skim to where we come back to reality. For love triangles, I am out. I feel like when I read romance, I want my two main characters to get together, and I don't want to complicate it with someone else. And so I feel like the last love triangle I read was maybe Twilight. For cracked spines, I'm probably out, but I feel like I don't care that much. You know, cracked spine means that you really enjoyed the book because you're really trying to get into it, you're really trying to get into those pages. And so, yeah, it doesn't bother me. I think if I'm buying used copies of books, you know, if there's two books, I'll pick the one that doesn't have a cracked spine, but that's purely for like lasting and quality issues rather than a hatred of the cracked spine itself. I can't think of a Back to My Small Town book that I have read recently that I felt strongly about in either a good or bad direction. And again, I was like browsing through my Goodreads and I was like, have I really not read a Back to My Small Town? So I don't think I have. So if you have recommendations for this specific trope, let me know. But for now, I guess I'm in. I'm down to be into it. For monsters are regular people, I am in. I like this trope. I feel like monsters can kind of be interpreted as like people that are different. And I feel like that kind of trope and theme is such a powerful one in literature. So I really like this one. Question 8 is no paragraph breaks. I am so out for this. There is nothing that will make me not read a book like being at a bookstore and like flipping through the pages and seeing it all be one solid piece of text. I feel like there's no reason for it. There's absolutely no reason for it. I feel like all stories have points that, you know, have like a breath before they keep going, and I feel like I don't understand the point of having no paragraph breaks, so I am so out for that one. I am all in when it comes to multi-generational stories. This is a very well-loved trope, and I think for very good reason. I'm actually coming out with a video next year that is like generational stories and the ones that I really like. Everybody loves Homegoing. I also love Homegoing. I think it is fantastic. I'm also really partial to Roma by Stephen Saylor, I think, which is a history of Rome, but through different descendants, and so each chapter is like somehow related to the chapter before, and it traces again the history of Rome. And then one book that I still really want to get to is Greenwood, which I think is about a series of people from the same family in, I think, Canada's forests. They're Canadian. I think it's a Canadian author as well. This one has really good ratings, and so I'm eager to get to that one next year. For rereading, I am very much into it, although I don't back that with action. I feel like a few years ago, like in 2020, it was in like the midst of the pandemic, right when it was starting, I binge reread a whole bunch of books that I had loved as like a child or a teen or a tween. And I had such a fantastic time doing that kind of reread. And so I feel like every time I do reread, I have a great time. I think I reread Piranesi last year. That was one of the few rereads that I did last year, and I really enjoyed it a second time around. And so there are a few books that I really want to get to next year. I really want to reread The Hobbit again, but as an audiobook because Andy Serkis has narrated it. And then I also want to get to The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which I got in audio format recently. Rereading, but maybe in a different format, could really add to the reading experience again. But in general, I'm a huge fan of rereading. And then artificial intelligence. I felt like this was kind of like a random question, Rick. So I am unsure where this question is going. I would say as a topic, I don't tend to read a lot about AI because I feel like AI is moving so fast that any book that is published about AI tends to become, you know, kind of old and dated very quickly. So I feel like if I'm learning about AI, I vastly prefer reading it just in like news articles. But if we're talking about AI as like part of a fictional subplot, I do think it is interesting. I don't read it a ton in sci-fi. I want to get back more into sci-fi next year, but I guess I'm down for it. I'm not against it in any way. For drop caps, I had to literally look up what a drop cap was. I think that because I'm such an e-reader, I think the drop caps are removed. I don't know. I don't have a A/B comparison that I can look at, but there are no drop caps on Kindle, and so I don't think I have any opinion on those. So I guess I'm in because I don't hate it. And then for happy endings, I am all for a happy ending in a romance book. In fact, I expect it, and if I don't get a happy ending in a romance book, I'm kind of upset because that's why I picked up the romance books, because I wanted something kind of lighthearted and fun that I know was going to end up in a good place. I think when it comes to maybe more literary fiction, happy endings I feel kind of mixed about, because I feel like if it ends and it's too neat and too saccharine and too kind of clean, I get a little bit annoyed because it doesn't feel real. And so I feel like, you know, I'm kind of half in, half out when it comes to happy endings for any other genre except for romance. Question 14 is plot points that converge at the end. I love this. I think that if an author can have different elements of the plot where I can't figure out where they're all going, but I know they're going towards a certain point, towards the end of the plot or end of the book, being super confused at the beginning of a novel and then watching your kind of understanding kind of ramp up until you are delivered to kind of a satisfactory place. I love that in books. I think it is so much fun. It's one of my favorite things in books, actually. So I am totally in when it comes to plot points that converge by the end. Similarly, I am very in when it comes to detailed magic systems. I think this is one of the best things about reading fantasy. There are some fantasy worlds that I really love. I really loved, this year I read The Will of the Many by James Islington, which is a really crazy kind of world building. I would call it like Roman inspired meets MLM, which I don't know if that's gonna sell anybody on that, but that's what the magic system reminded me of, and I just had a great time with this book. I'm really looking forward to the second book in this series coming out next year. I also really love the magic system in, I think it's called the Old Kingdom or the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix. That one is a really creative kind of YA magical world where the magic system is kind of a mix of hieroglyphs and Dante's Inferno, which again, I think that's a really great combination, but I don't know if that's sold anybody on it. And then I say the last magic system that I've read about recently that I really enjoyed is actually from Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is all about, the magic comes from differences in translation. I didn't love Babel as a novel. It was, to me, really long and kind of on the nose with some of its commentary, but I did think the magic system was my favorite part from that book. So all in all, totally in when it comes to detailed magic systems. For classic fantasy races, I am so in. I will read a book about an elf any day. That's all I need to say for that question. And then question 17 is Unreliable Narrators. I love this. This is also in maybe my top 3 book tropes of all time. I think it's reflective of, everyday life, because what's the saying they say? It's, there's 3 truths. There's your truth, my truth, and the real truth. And an unreliable narrator totally falls into that idea. The book that I read most recently that included an unreliable narrator was Trust by Hernan Diaz, which I absolutely loved. It was a total 5-star read for me. So I'm totally in when it comes to unreliable narrators. But when it comes to evil protagonists, I think I'm, again, kind of like this half in, half out, because I can't think of a lot of books that I've read that are purely from the point of view of like a purely evil protagonist. I think the only one that I know of that comes to mind that's kind of on my want to read list is Perfume by, I think, Patrick Suskind, which is from, I think, the point of view of a murderer, but in general, I think of a lot of like purely evil narrators. So if you have recommendations for this category, I'd be interested to hear what you have or what you have read in the past and enjoyed. Chosen One. This is, I think, pretty divisive for people. I do like a Chosen One story. I think what annoys me sometimes about the Chosen One as a trope is that sometimes the main characters can be like so perfect at absolutely everything they do, and I feel like then the Chosen One trope kind of gets annoying for me. So to have someone that is chosen but also kind of bumbles along is kind of my favorite type of Chosen One character. For When the Protagonist Dies, I am a fan of this. I thought that I would give some examples of books where I liked this trope, but then I realized that might be a spoiler, so I'm not going to say that. But in general, I do really like it when the protagonist dies, especially if I can't tell or I'm not anticipating that the protagonist is going to die. I am typically not a fan of really long chapters. I just feel like, again, there's no need. Like, typically a plot or content will have natural breaking points, and so I feel like I like having more chapters rather than less chapters, but I hate it when chapters are like 2 or 3 pages, so there's somewhere, some big chunk in the middle. French flaps. I love them. They are maybe my favorite format for a print book, but unfortunately I do not own a lot of them, and I do not see them as frequently as I wish I did in bookstores. I am out when it comes to Deckled Edges. I think they look messy. It's really hard also to when you're flipping through a book, you can't do that with Deckled Edges. So I don't understand the point of the Deckled Edges. So I'm not a fan of it. 3 more questions left. Question 24 is signed copies by the author. If I'm at a bookstore and I know I really want a book, and if there's the option when I get there of a book with a signature and a book without a signature, I will choose the one with the signature, because especially with the same price, why not? But other than that, I don't care. But I also don't care typically about special editions or the sprayed edges. I don't care about books matching, which is maybe blasphemous to say on BookTube. The only books that I do care about when it comes to signatures is if I go see an author speak, and then, I'll stick around to get the book signed and to say something to the author. So I went to see David Sedaris speak, and so I had a very awkward conversation with him, which I look back and cringe on, but I was excited to get his signature on one of my favorite books from him. And then there are certain authors, some of my favorite authors, I would just love to go see, hear them talk about their new releases. In those cases, I would absolutely want to get a signature from those authors. For dog-eared pages, this used to be the way that I kept track of all of my reading, so I don't mind a dog-eared page. Nowadays, I do use bookmarks, but that's solely because I have obtained 2 holographic bookmarks this year, which I actually just stood up so that I could go find them. But I have my bookmark that is like moose to wolf. I got this in Canada. Amazing. And then maybe my best little free library find was a holographic Chewbacca bookmark with a Chewbacca charm. Anyway, maybe nobody cares, but I love those. So now I use those simply because those give me joy. So in general, I use bookmarks, but I don't care about dog earring pages. And then the last question is chapter titles versus numbers. I am out when it comes to this. I feel like chapter titles very typically give away what's going to happen within a chapter. And so in fiction, I can't stand them. When it comes to nonfiction, I'm okay with it because it kind of maybe tells you, you know, what's going to be discussed in that next section. But in general, I am out. I vastly prefer numbers over titled chapters. That's the in and out book tag. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I feel like I'm mostly in, but the things that I'm out on, I'm like very strongly out on, which is pretty on brand for me. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. I would love to see Yena over at Modern Ashima do this tag if she so desires. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Please take care and have a good evening or day. Bye.